When a woman's body washes up on a Florida beach, no one is more shocked than the police.
I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
The Navy thinks her husband's best friend is the killer, but a psychic disagrees.
The man's innocent.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
A psychic connects with the dead.
He's going to kill him.
Will her message be enough to save an innocent man from life in prison? On the northeast coast of Florida, Jacksonville is home to the Mayport Naval Station, the third largest U.S. naval base in the world.
We live in a large military town, and we had 2 aircraft carriers, and you could tell when they were out to sea, that was 10,000 people gone from your population.
On the morning of March 26, 1988, 2 fishermen make a grisly discovery. They find a body washed up on the Intercoastal Waterway.
They thought it was a dolphin. They thought it was a fish that had washed up on the beach.
Dave Archer is a detective with the Atlantic Beach Police. When he arrives at the scene, he immediately knows this is no simple drowning.
I could tell it was that of a white female. Her hands were tied behind her back with a fishing stringer. And I thought, okay, that's odd.
She's identified as 22-year-old Anita Lucander. She had been reported missing by her co-workers at the Navy base 9 days earlier.
She was in my duty section, and she didn't show up for work. And in the Navy, you show up for work.
Peter Jstone was a co-worker and a close friend of the Lucanders. When he'd realized Anita was missing, and knowing her husband was away at sea, he and fellow workers began a citywide search.
I mean, everybody, we all gotten worried. I mean, even the Navy had gotten hold of her husband, Bill, who was, I believe, down in Guantanamo Bay at the time.
My chief brought me down to the chief's mess and actually spent about 4 hours with me talking and settling me down. And I won't forget that night.
The autopsy suggests Anita's body had been in the water for 9 days. She was gagged with a white T-shirt. She had been strangled and her body had been mutilated.
I said, do you think she was raped? And he said, I can't tell. I said, what do you mean you can't tell? He said, all that's been surgically removed. And I thought, what?
The medical examiner also notes that her left ear had been cut off.
I told my boss, I said, look, I am entirely out of my league on this one. I have never in my life seen anything like this before.
Because of the shocking nature of the crime, they call in both state and federal law enforcement agencies, including the FBI.
Atlantic Beach at the time was a small town, small police force. I don't think they were used to homicide investigations. And honestly, I don't think it was really taken seriously until Anita's body was found.
When investigators initially searched the Lucander home, the front door was unlocked.
There was no sign of forced entry. Just looked like a normal apartment. I'm thinking we got another missing military wife. You know, she's probably took off with somebody, or who knows.
3 days later, Anita's truck was found parked at a local bar just 4 miles from the house. When Bill Lucander arrives home from sea, he notices right away that something is wrong. Some of his guns are missing from his cabinet. Police immediately check pawn shops in the area, and one dealer says someone tried to sell him the stolen guns. A composite sketch of the suspect is made, but it leads nowhere and is filed away.
We started out with everybody was a suspect. In fact, the insurance company called me and said, we're fixing to pay off on the Lucander case, but we want to know if the husband is a suspect, because if he is, we're not going to pay. And I told him, I said, lady, at this point, he's the only one that's not a suspect. And the reason he's not is because he was out of the country.
A month later, a bizarre discovery. A mailman finds Anita's wallet. Sitting on top of it, a cold glass of water. No fingerprints are found on the wallet or the glass.
We took that as like a sign saying, okay, you guys are getting cold. You're heading in the wrong direction. You need to go back the other way.
The next day, Anita's purse is discovered blocks away from the Lucander home and on the same street as Bill's best friend, Peter Jstone. Friends say that Jstone spent a lot of time at the Lucander home, especially when his good friend Bill was away at sea.
Well, when Bill was gone, yeah, I would hang out over there. It wasn't not hardly as much as I did when Bill was there.
To investigators, Jstone is beginning to look suspicious.
Every time you turn around, bam, Peter Jstone standing right there looking at you. How's it going, guys? Is there anything I could do for you? No, we're on an active homicide investigation right now. There's nothing you can do for us unless you did it.
Peter takes 2 polygraph tests. The first is inconclusive. The second one he passes.
I never felt concerned that they were investigating me. I never felt concerned with that. Always anything I could do to help.
Peter remains a suspect, but with no new witnesses, no physical evidence, the police don't have enough to make a case.
Everything was circumstantial. There was no smoking gun. There was no fingerprint to say, this is this and this is that. Just couldn't do it.
9 months after Anita was murdered, police are still no closer to catching her killer.
We'd pretty much hit a dead end.
The Anita Lucander case goes cold. 7 years pass without a single lead, and Anita's brutal killer is still out there.
Between 1988 and 1995, I was very frustrated, angry. I was still basically living and working with the same group of folks, and pretty much realized that, there was probably somebody in that group that had killed Anita.
Then, in 1995, the Naval Criminal Investigation Services sets up a cold case unit, and the Anita Lucander case starts to warm up again. They go back to the original suspect list from 1989. At the top is Peter Jstone, who is now married with 2 children and no longer in the Navy. 2 agents visit him in his home in Maryland.
They just want to ask me a few questions, and the case had been brought back up. And just in a split second, it turned ugly, and they said, "You did it. We know you did it. You're the one, and you better tell us now." And once again, I was just flabbergasted.
Investigators grill Jstone for a full 3 days. Now, in a dramatic turnaround, they believe they have the evidence they need to nail him. He's taken into custody and held for 30 days, until the Florida Duval County Grand Jury indicts the former Navy squadron member for the murder of Anita Lucander. Mimi Hannon, an investigator for the Public Defender's Office, is assigned the case.
We had a man that probably didn't commit this homicide, and it was our job to prove that.
For the defense, 7 years after the murder, it was going to be tough going. So breaking with convention, they turned to a psychic for help. But could a psychic's cryptic clues help save Peter Jstone from life in prison? It's been 7 years since Anita Lucander's mutilated body washed up on the Intracoastal Waterway in Jacksonville, Florida. Her co-worker, former Navy Petty Officer Peter Jstone, is charged with murdering his best friend's wife.
How many times can you say, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything?
There was no physical evidence really linking Peter to the crime. The only thing that linked him to Anita Lucander was his friendship with her, his business acquaintanceship with her, and his friendship with her husband.
Ann Finnell and Pat McGinnis are Peter Jstone's public defense lawyers.
Perhaps Peter Jstone was an easy person to focus in on because he was cooperative with them.
The most damning evidence the Navy had was a supposed verbal confession given by Peter Jstone during their 3-day interrogation of him in Maryland.
After I was arrested, I spent 30 days in Maryland jail awaiting paperwork from Florida because I was arrested under a fugitive from justice for murder. And when I got to Florida is when I met my attorney, Pat McGinnis, and they said that I had confessed. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't confess to anything. I kept telling them no for 2.5 days. And apparently they had this whole confession that they wrote up. Nothing I wrote up, nothing I signed, nothing I said, nothing.
The false confession that Peter ultimately gave was, basically, if I'd have done this, here's what I would have done.
Naval investigators contend that Peter Jstone made advances to Anita, which she rejected. Angry, he strangles her, panics, and steals the guns from the cabinet to make it look like a burglary. He then dumps the guns and Anita Lucander's body off the bridge into the intercoastal waterway.
Most people don't believe that anyone would ever confess to something they didn't do. Those instances where interrogations last for long periods of time, the likelihood of a false confession is real. And in Peter Jstone's case, this went on for 3 days.
Now it's up to the defense team to build a case for Peter Jstone's innocence. Investigator Mimi Hannon's task is to go back 7 years to the original 1988 investigation.
Law enforcement in this case botched up an investigation tremendously. And it was a cold case, so you're going back and witnesses forget and people die and they move. And it's just really hard to reconstruct a real solid defense from something that happened so long ago.
To bolster their case, Hannon makes an unusual suggestion.
It occurred to me that law enforcement utilizes psychics. The government has utilized psychics. And back in the 90s, people weren't very forthcoming about using psychics to help them solve mysteries. When I first mentioned to Pat and Ann that I had a psychic friend and I would like to run the case by her and see if she had any feedback, they were very skeptical. Patrick almost did it, I felt, just to humor me. But I wasn't going to put my professional reputation on the line. I believed in Sharon's ability and was looking forward to using it.
Sharon Johns is a psychic who lives in Gainesville, Georgia. She says her psychic ability comes from a higher being.
I always pray to work from that highest level. And by doing that, the angels and the guides do come and stand with you because you're working in that light. I ask for extremely accurate information for those that I read for this day. When I get information, it just comes in words, just kind of quick words, or in a video, or just in kind of symbols.
Hannon and the psychic are friends, but they've never worked together until now.
I do all of my work over the phone because I prefer to be in my space. If I'm sitting beside a person, I have to move away from them. And I'm just more comfortable to do phone work. I don't care if the person lives next door. I'll say, no, call me on the phone. Because that way, my energy is more clear. Sure, no
when
problem.
Mimi calls Sharon Johns, she has no knowledge of the case and asks Mimi not to give her any.
She wanted to know the victim's name and date of birth and Peter's name and date of birth.
Peter
and that's all I gave her.
Immediately before she could even get his name out, I said, the man's innocent.
She told me that Peter would be found innocent and that the jury would come back in with an acquittal in March.
When I look at different aspects of what's going on, things just come immediately. With this case, it was just like a TV reel, just taking place.
Then Sharon inexplicably hones in on a curious clue.
I keep getting this about a composite somewhere. And you really need to see if somebody can find it.
How could Sharon know about the 7-year-old long-lost composite, the sketch of the man who tried to sell the stolen guns? And why does she think it's so significant?
The composite had not been found yet. We had so many volumes of discovery to go through that we intentionally had to start searching through the discovery boxes. And we eventually did find it. It was there, just as she said. I came back to the office the next morning, and Pat wanted to know what the psychic said. And his eyes got big as saucers.
There were views she had about the case and expressed that we were quite frankly puzzled as to how she could have arrived at those without a more intimate knowledge of the case than she had.
We had Pat's attention. He was going to take her more seriously than he had.
Sharon Johns was suggestive that this was, in fact, the person who was Anita Lucander's killer.
And the composite picture doesn't look anything like Peter Jstone.
When I first saw the police sketch of the composite, I I don't think it looked like me at all. One, I think the person had hair. And I'd like to show you some pictures of me back then. I haven't lost much hair since, in 20 years. And not to mention, I'm not wearing my glasses now, but back then I always wore glasses. So, without bumping into a wall, didn't look a lot like me at all.
As we began to work on the case and went further and further into things, then I saw more and more.
Patrick had asked me to ask Sharon a series of questions. He wanted them tape recorded so that it would be the exact words of Sharon Johns. During my conversation, her voice started to go from her own voice to the voice of somebody else.
As well as seeing visions, Sharon claims she is a channeler. It's a phenomena that allows spirits to communicate with the living.
It was really sort of a surprise to me, too, in that I wasn't really, what you're saying, preparing for this.
The voice was very high-pitched. It sounded like a little girl's voice.
He's going to kill me.
I don't know where Sharon went, but I was talking to somebody else.
Can a psychic channeling the voice of a dead woman help change the course of justice? A sailor accused of killing his best friend's wife is about to go on trial.
You did it. We know you did it. You gotta be kidding me.
When a psychic is asked to help on the case, she says he's innocent.
It's like I saw the whole thing just unfold, like a video.
And now, in one of her sessions, she claims to channel the voice of the murder victim, Anita Lucander.
She started talking in first person about the crime, and she walked me through the crime as it happened.
When I'm really into a trance channel, I am moved completely out of the way, to the point that I don't have any idea of what is being said. Mimi tells me that it was a high-pitched little voice. She sounded like a little child.
The voice sounded scared and frightened and had expressed that to me, that she was held for days, and he would leave her there alone for hours at a time, bound. And she knew that he was going to kill her. And I'll never forget the last words this voice said was, "And then it was done." And I took that to mean, and then he killed me. I'd never been a part of something like that before. So at that point, I went over to jail, and I pulled Peter out. And I said, Peter, what's did Anita sound like? And he said, you couldn't mistake her voice. She sounded just like a little girl.
It's like she is the one that showed me herself in that chat that she was in. And by her coming through and actually speaking was amazing, in that the people that were listening to it heard it, but the recording didn't record it.
There was nothing on it but static, and there was a lot of distortion on the tape.
If the psychic's revelations are accurate, Anita was held captive for several days before being tossed into the waterway. And if this is true, the prosecution's contention that her body had been in the water 9 days must be false.
When we looked at the autopsy results and the photographs, both Mr. McGinnis and I were very suspicious of the body having been in the water for that full 9-day period. And the reason being is that in the intercoastal waterway, even in March, there's a lot of crab activity.
To prove their theory, the defense team order a crab test at the same location where Anita's body was found. In the experiment, raw chicken is used in place of human flesh and is placed at the bottom of the river for 9 days.
While that body is on the bottom especially, it would be attacked by crabs and other animals that are in the water as well. This body had none of that kind of activity.
If crabs didn't ravage Anita's body, it could only mean that she was not in the waterway for the full 9 days. This contradicts the Navy's contention that Peter killed Anita and dumped her body that same night. It makes the so-called confession meaningless and amazingly vindicates the word of a psychic. February 18th, 1997. Almost 9 years after Anita Lucander's brutal murder, Peter Jstone goes on trial.
Peter was definitely fearful facing trial because he was looking at a life sentence. He had been behind bars for almost 20 months by the time it had gone to trial.
But just as the trial gets underway, the psychic makes an unusual request.
Mimi called me and she says, is there anything else that we need to do? We're going to trial. I said, just be sure that you've got that composite. I said, it's very important. I don't know why, but you've got to take it.
We had no idea where she was going with that and what the significance would be.
Anne Fennell enters the composite sketch into evidence, and it will prove to be pivotal.
Trials don't always end up like you want them to end up. It is an incredible nerve-wracking experience, much more so than if you're going to trial with someone who you either know or think is guilty.
After a 3-week trial, the jury begins their deliberations. Just 2 hours in, the jury requests to see the composite sketch of the man who pawned the guns once again.
And we found out there was one holdout in that jury room who wanted to take a closer look at Peter Jstone.
1 hour later, the jury reaches a verdict.
My heart was, coming out of my chest, and you're just sitting there, and the judge takes a piece of paper, and he reads it, and I'm like, okay. And then he folds it back up, and he hands it back.
It was a real nail-biter for a few minutes until the jury was seated and the clerk read the verdict.
With the jury find the defendant not guilty.
A not guilty verdict in the death of his best friend's wife, Anita Lucander, who was raped, strangled, and mutilated in 1988. On March 17, 1997, just as the psychic predicted, Peter Jstone walked out of the Jacksonville courtroom a free man. How did the psychic know so much? She said that the key to Peter's defense lay in the composite sketch. She predicted that he would be free in March, and she correctly predicted that Anita had not been thrown straight into the water after the murder, as the prosecution stated.
Sharon's contribution to the case had become huge. She invigorated the defense team. We were on to certain defense theories. That was what Sharon was seeing too.
It got him looking at other avenues and justifying what she had said. It was great. So I think good chance she saved my life.
Today, 21 years after Anita Lucander was murdered, Sharon Johns and Peter Jstone meet for the first time.
You look good. You look good. It has. Oh. It's so, you're welcome. You're welcome. Oh. Doing this work is a big responsibility. I have simply just learned to trust. And what I see, I give. I can't give them any more than what I see or what I hear.
To date, the cold-blooded killer of Anita Lucander has never been brought to justice.
She was my wife. She's a daughter. She was a sister, an aunt, and there's only really one person that knows what happened to Anita, and that person needs to come forward and put this to rest. And if he's not man enough to do that, personally, I hope his life's a living hell.
An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmira, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. a town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack, beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmira Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmira in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up and they give them false information. So it would make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmira's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
Oh, I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only 2 rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmira, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmira police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the 2 mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the 2 suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, but he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their 2 prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those 2 together at any given time.
Again, the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these two or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a second floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmira, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Swartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. When they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
So they couldn't match the bite marks exactly. It didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a to her 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. I mean, they have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.